Imara didn't mean to say it out loud, but when her eyes dropped just for a second, just long enough to process the sheer, overwhelming scale of Kong Tao's standing in the half-light, the words slipped out in a breathless whisper she couldn't take back. That's so big. The air in the penthouse stopped moving. Taos didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He didn't rush. He just tilted his head, the dark tattoo on his neck pulsing with the rhythm of his heartbeat, and took one slow, heavy step closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his unbuttoned shirt. Close enough that her back pressed flat against the cold marble wall of the east wing. Close enough that she forgot how to breathe. Imara. His voice was a low rumble, the kind of deep vibration that made dangerous men seem terrifyingly calm. Look at me. She did. And the way he was watching her, patient, predatory, yet strangely restrained, made her knees weak. I'll be gentle, he promised softly, his large hand coming up to shield her from the storm outside. I promise. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. But this wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't just about the way his massive frame eclipsed the world around her. It was about what would happen after. Because men like Kong Taos didn't do casual. Men like the head of the Black Dragon didn't let go. And if she let him in, really let him in, there would be no walking away. Before we find out just how dangerous Mr. Kong really is, I want to know, where in the world are you watching this love story from? Let me know your country in the comments right now. Okay, let's get into the story. The elevator ride to the 85th floor took long enough for Imara Vance to question every life choice that had led her here. The Skyline Tower wasn't just a building. It was a needle of black glass piercing the clouds, a fortress for people with too much money and too many secrets. When the doors finally slid open, the silence that greeted her was absolute. Ms. Vance. The voice came from the far side of the cavernous living room, deep enough to vibrate through the soles of her heels. Imara stepped forward, her portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield. The man standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows didn't turn immediately. He was a silhouette against the gray afternoon sky, a mountain of broad shoulders and unnatural stillness. When he finally pivoted, Imara's breath hitched. Kong Taos was terrifyingly beautiful. He was taller than she had imagined, dwarfing the luxury furniture around him. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing pale skin and the faintest hint of black ink creeping up the side of his throat. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake to bridge the gap between them. He simply gestured to the glass coffee table where a single manila envelope lay. The contract, he said. The words were clipped, precise, and devoid of warmth. Imara approached, opening the folder. Her eyes widened at the figure on the check. It was triple her standard rate. It was enough to pay off her father's business debts in a single month. It was enough to buy her freedom. But freedom always came with a price. There is one condition, Mr. Kong said, his dark eyes locking onto hers, pinning her in place. He pointed toward a set of heavy, double-oak doors on the far right side of the penthouse. The east wing is strictly off-limits. No cleaning staff, no contractors, and especially not you. Do we have an agreement? Ah, yes. Of course, Mr. Kong. Imara stammered, signing the paper before common sense could talk her out of it. I'll just take some measurements for the drapes. He didn't leave. As Imara moved to the massive windows, extending her metal tape measure, the air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. She was used to clients ignoring her, burying their noses in phones or laptops while she worked. But Kong Taos was not ignoring her. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight, pressing against the curve of her spine, tracing the line of her shoulder as she reached up to the glass. The hair on her arms stood up. It was a primal warning, the kind a gazelle feels when the tall grass rustles nearby. Imara spun around, expecting to catch him looking at his watch or the city view. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking right at her. He stood perfectly still in the center of the room, his hands deep in his pockets, watching her with an intensity that felt less like observation and more like ownership. He didn't look away when she caught him. He didn't blink. He just held her gaze, dark and unreadable, until Imara was the one forced to turn back to the window, her hands trembling as the metal tape snapped back into its case with a loud crack that echoed through the empty room. 3 weeks turned the penthouse into a cage of velvet and silence. Imara had learned the rhythm of the space, the way the afternoon light hit the marble, the hum of the HVAC system, and the ghostly quiet that settled when Kong Taos wasn't home. He was a phantom, leaving before she arrived and returning long after she left. Until tonight, a storm was battering the glass walls, turning the city lights into smeared streaks of neon. Imara was on her knees, finalizing the layout for the lounge rug, when a sound shattered the quiet. It wasn't thunder. It was a heavy, wet thud, followed by the undeniable clatter of metal skidding across wood. It came from the east wing. Imara froze. The contract burned in her memory, strictly off limits. But the silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with something wrong. "Mr. Kong," she called out. No answer. Only a low, ragged groan. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the double oak doors. Fear told her to run to the elevator. Instinct told her to open the door. Her hand trembled on the cold brass handle. She pushed. The room beyond wasn't a bedroom. It was a war room. Monitors lined the far wall, flickering with security feeds. A steel table in the center was covered in black handguns and dismantled silencers. And there, gripping the edge of the table with white-knuckled desperation, was TOS. He looked up, and Imara gasped. The pristine white shirt was gone, shredded and discarded on the floor. His torso was a map of old scars, but her eyes fixed on the fresh, angry wound in his side, oozing dark crimson over the intricate ink on his ribs. He was pale, his skin slick with sweat, eyes glazed with feverish exhaustion. "I told you," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together, "never to come in here." He took a step toward her, perhaps to intimidate her, perhaps to push her out. But his legs betrayed him. His knees buckled. Imara moved before she thought, rushing forward just as his massive frame pitched sideways. She caught him, or tried to. The sheer weight of him nearly crushed her, driving her down to the floor with him. He landed heavily against her chest, his head dropping onto her shoulder. The smell of expensive cologne was choked out by the metallic tang of blood. Imara froze, terrified to breathe, waiting for the monster she had glimpsed in the contract to snap her neck. But he didn't strike. He didn't yell. He just let out a long, shuddering breath against her neck, his forehead resting heavily against her collarbone. For the first time, the terrifying stillness was gone. He wasn't a statue or a kingpin. He was just a man, heavy with pain, bleeding out in the arms of the only person who had dared to open the door. The stitches were gone, and so was the vulnerability. In the weeks since the incident in the East Wing, Kong TOS had rebuilt his walls, adding reinforced steel where the cracks had been. The penthouse had shifted from a workspace into a gilded cage. It started when Imara tried to call the elevator at 6 p.m. The button remained dark. When she buzzed the lobby, a monotone voice informed her that Mr. Kang's private transport was waiting in the secure basement garage and that pedestrian exit was no longer authorized. Fury, hot and sharp, overrode her fear. She stormed back into the main lounge where TOS stood by the kitchen island, calmly reviewing a stack of documents. He looked immaculate again, the white shirt crisp, the posture rigid, as if he hadn't been bleeding out on her floor just days ago. "Unlock the elevator," Imara demanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. TOS didn't look up from the papers. "My driver will take you home. He will wait outside your apartment until morning, and then he will bring you back." "I didn't ask for a driver, and I certainly didn't ask for a babysitter." Imara threw her portfolio onto the sofa. "I have a life, TOS. I have errands. I have a father to visit. You can't just lock me down because you got careless." He turned a page. "You saw the East Wing. You saw my face when I was indisposed. That changes the parameters of your employment." "Parameters?" Imara stepped closer, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "I saved your life. I washed the blood off your floor. I am not some asset you can manage, and I am certainly not your property." The paper rustled as he set it down. The sound was soft, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. TOS turned slowly. The indifference vanished, replaced by a dark, simmering focus that sucked the air out of the room. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, forcing Imara to tilt her head back as he eclipsed the overhead lights. He was too close. The heat of his body radiated through his suit, a stark reminder of the power he held back. Imara's back hit the edge of the sofa, trapping her. "You think this is about ownership?" His voice dropped an octave, a low growl that vibrated in her chest. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, his eyes scanning her features with terrifying intensity. "If you were my property, I would keep you locked in this tower where no one could touch you. But you are out there." He reached out, his hand hovering near her neck before gripping the sofa back behind her, boxing her in. "You are not property, Amara," he whispered, the threat heavy in every syllable. "You are a witness. You are a vulnerability. And to the people hunting me, that makes you a target. I am not controlling you. I am keeping you alive." The champagne silk dress clung to Amara like a second skin, shivering with every step she took into the grand ballroom. It was the dress she had designed in her head 1,000 times, but wearing it here, under the predatory gaze of the city's elite, felt less like a fantasy and more like walking naked into a wolf's den. "Stay close," Teos murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear. His hand rested on the small of her back, the heat of his palm burning through the delicate fabric. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was a tactile leash. He guided her through the sea of tuxedos and diamond chokers, his presence parting the crowd like the hull of an icebreaker. Amara kept her head high, trying to ignore the whispers. To the world, she was the mysterious date of the reclusive skyline owner. To Teos, she was bait he refused to let out of his sight. "I need air," Amara whispered, the scent of expensive perfume and hidden malice making her dizzy. "We don't separate," Teos replied, his eyes scanning the perimeter, cold and calculating. He signaled a passing waiter. "Water." The waiter, a slender man with a bowed head, pivoted sharply. He moved too fast. Amara frowned. Waiters were trained to glide, not rush. As he reached for the tray, the light caught not on crystal, but on steel. It happened in the space between heartbeats. The waiter didn't reach for a glass. His hand whipped out from beneath a napkin, a serrated steak knife aiming straight for Amara's ribs. She didn't even have time to scream. A massive hand shot past her face, moving with the blurring speed of a striking cobra. Teos caught the assassin's wrist inches from Amara's stomach. The momentum of the stop was so violent it sent a shockwave of air against her skin. For a second, the scene froze. The music played on. The guests laughed. Then, Teos tightened his grip. His expression didn't change. He didn't grimace. He simply looked at the man with dead, shark-like eyes and twisted. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a dry branch snapping in a winter forest. The knife clattered to the floor, followed instantly by the assassin's scream. The music died. The laughter evaporated. Teos didn't let go. He held the man's broken arm suspended in the air, using his immense height to dangle the attacker like a rag doll. He stepped in front of Amara, his broad back blocking her from the room's view, shielding her from the violence he was inflicting. "My apologies," Teos said to the room, his voice calm, polite, and utterly terrifying as he shoved the whimpering man toward his security team. He adjusted his cufflinks, then looked down at Amara, his eyes searching hers for damage. "I believe we're leaving." The drive was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and silence. By the time the armored SUV crunched onto the gravel of the mountain retreat, the adrenaline from the gala had curdled into a shivering exhaustion. The safe house wasn't a cabin. It was a fortress of glass and dark timber perched precariously on a cliff edge, isolated from the world by miles of dense pine forest. Teos killed the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. "We're safe here," he said, though his eyes were still scanning the treeline. He ushered her inside, his hand hovering protectively at the small of her back. The interior was cold, the air stagnant from disuse. As the lights flickered on, Amara realized the layout was nothing like the penthouse. It was an open-concept studio, intimate and inescapable. And in the center of the room, dominating the space, sat a single, king-sized bed. Amara stopped dead. The reality of the situation crashed into her. No guest rooms. No east wing to hide in. Just him, her, and the storm outside. "I'll take the floor," Teos said, reading her gaze. He began unbuttoning his cuffs, his movements heavy with fatigue. "The sofa is too short." "You're too big for the floor, Teos," Amara whispered, the fight draining out of her. She hugged her arms, trying to warm herself, but she was trembling, not from the cold, but from the terrifying proximity of the man who had just snapped a bone like a twig to save her. "I know you are on the edge of your seat waiting to see what happens in this safe house. If you are loving this story, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. It helps me create more stories like this for you. Also, drop a fire emoji in the comments if you think Amara should give in to him." Teos froze, his hands still on his cuffs. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the mask of the Mafia Don slipped. In the harsh light of the safe house, he looked starved. Why me? Imara asked, her voice breaking. Why did you hire me, Teos? There are 1,000 architects in the city. Better ones. Safer ones. Why did you bring me into this world? He crossed the room slowly, stopping just inches from her. The scent of rain and gunpowder clung to him. He reached out, his thumb grazing her cheekbone, a touch so feather-light it made her breath hitch. I didn't hire you for the penthouse, Imara, he confessed, his voice rough with a truth he had kept buried. I was at a coffee shop on 4th Street 3 months ago. It was raining. I was tired. Of the blood. Of the noise. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. Then I saw you. You were sitting by the window, laughing at something on your phone. You looked like the sun breaking through a storm. You were so bright, Imara. I wanted to be near the light, even if I knew I would eventually burn it. The silence following his confession was louder than the storm raging outside. Teos stood frozen, his forehead resting against hers, waiting for her to run. He had admitted to stalking her, to dragging her into his hell because he was selfish enough to want her light. He expected fear. He expected disgust. He didn't expect her hand. Imara's fingers trembled as they drifted up from his chest, tracing the sharp line of his collarbone until they found the ink crawling up his throat. The black dragon. The mark of a killer. Her fingertips grazed the sensitive skin over his pulse, and Teos flinched violently. It wasn't a withdrawal, it was a shock, his body rigid as if he'd been burned. He was used to fists, to knives, to the recoil of a gun. He wasn't used to this. Does it hurt? Imara whispered, her eyes searching his. No, he choked out, his voice wrecked. It's just, no one touches me there. Not like this. The air between them ignited. The restraint that had held Teos back for months, the professional distance, the physical barriers, snapped like a tension wire. He didn't pull away, he surged forward. His hands found her waist, his grip firm and possessive, backing her until her shoulders hit the cool timber wall of the cabin. He looked at her with a hunger that was terrifying in its intensity. Imara, he groaned, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. Stop me. Please, stop me. I don't want to, she breathed. That was the only permission he needed. His hands moved to his shirt, fingers fumbling with the buttons he usually handled with surgical precision. He ripped it open, the fabric parting to reveal the full expanse of his chest, a landscape of muscle, old scars, and the dark, intricate ink that swirled down his torso. Imara's eyes widened. In the dim light, the sheer scale of him was overwhelming. He wasn't just tall. He was massive, a wall of power and pent-up desire that loomed over her delicate frame. Her gaze dropped lower, taking in the evidence of his need, the way his body strained against the confines of his trousers. The breath left her lungs in a rush. She didn't mean to say it out loud, but the shock bypassed her filter. That's so big. Teos froze, his breathing ragged. He saw the way her eyes widened, the instinctive tremor that ran through her body as she realized the physical reality of the man she was inviting in. He leaned down, his shadow engulfing her completely, bracing his hands on the wall on either side of her head. I know, Mara, he rumbled, the sound vibrating against her chest. He brushed his thumb over her bottom lip, his touch agonizingly slow. But you don't have to be afraid. I'll be gentle. I promise. The phone on the nightstand didn't ring. It simply lit up the dark room like a warning flare. Teos reached for it, his body tensing against Imara's back. He answered, his voice rough with sleep. Uncle. The voice on the other end was a jagged whisper. Forgive me, nephew. They threatened Jayan. I gave them the mountain. Teos moved before the line went dead. He didn't explain. He grabbed Imara, rolling them off the bed just as the front window exploded inward. Shards of glass sprayed the duvet where they had been laying seconds ago. The safe house was no longer safe. It was a kill box. Stay down, Teos roared, flipping the heavy oak table for cover. He was a blur of motion, a pistol materializing in his hand as he returned fire into the darkness outside. Bullets chewed through the timber walls, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Imara pressed her face into the floorboards, covering her ears, but the noise was deafening. Through the chaos, she saw a shadow detach itself from the broken window. A Golden Viper soldier had flanked them, stepping through the shattered glass, raising a shotgun toward Teos's exposed back. Teos was focused on the front door. He didn't see him. Imara didn't think. Her hand found the spare Glock Teos had left near the bed. It was heavy, cold, and smelled of oil. She lifted it, the weight foreign and terrifying in her grip. She pointed it at the shadow and squeezed. The recoil jarred her entire shoulder, a violent kick that knocked the wind out of her. The shadow crumpled. Suddenly, the shooting stopped. The silence that followed was ringing and absolute. Teos spun around, his weapon raised, expecting a second wave. Instead, he saw the dead man on the floor, and then he saw Amara. She was kneeling amidst the glass, the smoking gun slipping from her fingers. She wasn't crying. She was shaking, a violent, full-body tremor that she couldn't control. Teos didn't check the perimeter. He didn't check the body. He scrambled toward her, kicking the weapon away as if it were a venomous snake. He pulled her into his chest, his hands frantically checking her for wounds, smearing his own blood onto her champagne silk slip. Mara, he choked out. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. Her eyes were wide, vacant, staring at nothing. He looked devastated. The bullet wound in his side from weeks ago hadn't hurt him this much. Seeing the gun in her hand, seeing the violence reflected in her eyes, that broke him. I promised, he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers, his voice cracking with self-loathing. I promised to keep you clean. I promised to be gentle. And now look at what I've done to you. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and black under the neon lights. Kong Teos walked into the headquarters of the Golden Vipers not as a conqueror, but as a ghost. He wore a fresh suit, black on black, impeccable and sharp. He carried no gun. He carried no knife. The guards at the entrance of the abandoned shipping terminal, the Vipers' true seat of power, didn't know what to do. They raised their rifles, fingers twitching on triggers, terrified by the sheer size of the man walking toward them. Teos didn't slow down. He simply raised his empty hands, palms open. Take me to Chairman Han, he said. They marched him into the central office, a glass box overlooking the warehouse floor. Han, an older man with a scar bisecting his lip, sat behind a mahogany desk, flanked by a dozen armed soldiers. He looked at Teos with a mixture of suspicion and glee. The Black Dragon walks into my house unarmed. Han sneered, leaning back. Have you finally lost your mind, Teos? Or did you come to die? I came to trade, Teos said. His voice was steady, betraying none of the ruin inside him. He reached into his jacket pocket. The guards tensed, safeties clicking off. Teos moved slowly, pulling out not a weapon, but a heavy iron key ring and a folded deed. He tossed them onto the desk. The metal rang out in the silence. The Skyline Tower, the shipping routes, the North District, Teos listed them off like items on a grocery list. It's all there. My father's empire. Everything I built. Han stared at the keys. Greed flickered in his eyes, warring with disbelief. And what is the price for this kingdom? Your life? No, Teos said. Hers. The room went deadly quiet. Han laughed, a dry, rasping sound. You give up the crown for a woman? The architect? You are weak, nephew. Your father would be ashamed. My father is dead, Teos replied. And if you touch her again, you will be too. You are in no position to threaten me. Han shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. You are alone. You are nothing. Teos looked at the men surrounding him. He could kill 3 of them before they dropped him. But 3 wasn't enough. Imara needed 0 enemies. Slowly, agonizingly, Kong Teos lowered his massive frame. He sank down, one knee hitting the concrete floor, then the other. The sight of the giant bowing his head sucked the air out of the room. He didn't look at the floor. He looked straight at Han, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying resolve. You want to be the king? Teos asked, his voice low and final. Fine. Take the crown. Take the city. But you leave the girl. She does not exist to you anymore. He waited, a weapon sheathed in surrender, trading his legacy for her breath. Han touched the keys to the Skyline Tower, his fingers trembling with victory. That was his mistake. The moment his skin grazed the cold metal, the warehouse lights died. Teos didn't rise from his knees. He exploded from them. The surrender had not been an act of submission. It was a Trojan horse. In the pitch black, the Black Dragon didn't need to see. He needed to hunt. The chaos that followed wasn't a fight. It was an extermination. By the time the emergency floodlights flickered back on, the Golden Viper leadership had ceased to exist. Teos stood alone in the center of the room, straightening his cuffs. He looked at the carnage, then at the exit. He didn't go back to the tower. He didn't go back to the money. He vanished into the rain. 3 months bled into a gray haze. Imara was back in her small storefront office. The Skyline commission was finished, the money wired anonymously to her account, wiping her debts clean. She was free. She was safe. She was miserable. She sat at her drafting table, staring at a blueprint for a suburban kitchen. The lines blurred together. Every time it rained, she looked for a black SUV. Every time a tall man walked past the window, her heart hammered against her ribs, only to break when he turned out to be a stranger. She had survived the war, but the silence was killing her. The bell above the shop door chimed. "I'm sorry, we're closing," Imara called out, not lifting her head from her hands. "I'm not looking for an architect." The voice was deep, vibrating through the floorboards, but it lacked the cold, metallic edge of the Mafia dawn. It was warm. It was human. Imara's breath hitched. She looked up slowly, terrified it was a dream. A shadow fell across her desk, a massive, encompassing shadow that she knew better than her own. Kong Taos filled the doorway, blocking out the streetlights. But the armor was gone. There was no Italian suit, no tie, no gun holster. He wore a soft, charcoal knit sweater that hugged his broad shoulders and dark jeans. His hair was loose, falling over his forehead, softening the sharp angles of his face. He looked different. He looked free. He walked toward her, the floorboards groaning under his weight, but his movements were unhurried. He stopped at the edge of her desk, his hands that had destroyed an empire for her, resting gently on the wood. He waited for her to realize he was real. "I told you, Mara," he said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time, reaching his eyes. "I'd be gentle." What a roller coaster. If you want a part 2 where Imara has to deal with Teos's jealous ex-fiancé, click the like button. And if you love Mafia romances, you have to watch this next video on the screen. It's even crazier. See you there.